Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining again for our last workshop. Hello, hello. Everyone is connecting. Good to see you again. So this is a kind of ritual, getting back to this Zoom sessions. This is something we are experiencing now for a moment. Okay. It seems that others are coming and joining. So I hope that you had some good lunch and also a little bit of the rest from the screen, as we are doing a lot of screen sharing. Oh, that's it. So still others are connecting.
Hello.
Okay, I can see that still some of you are connecting, and there is the loading process of your profiles. Others are coming, so we will wait just one more minute, obviously, where people are entering the room, and then we will start. Yeah, so it looks like that there are more of us now at this moment, so let's start. So welcome back, everyone. I'm pleased that we are still in our group already, even though a little bit tired after 2 days, as we already said, but kind of still recharging and processing everything that we've said so far and we've experienced. And there is the last workshop session now waiting for us, and I'm very pleased that I'm meeting again, and I have a pleasure and privilege to welcome here as our guest tutor, FRANCESCA Tagliavia Martinez. Thank you so much, FRANCESCA, for joining us. I'm very happy.
For inviting. Thank you, and welcome to everyone. I'm happy to meet you.
And today's workshop will be led by FRANCESCA. It will contain a part of the presentation, and there will be a lot of space dedicated to discussion. But firstly, as usual, I will just briefly introduce FRANCESCA. FRANCESCA Martinez Tagliavia is an adjunct professor of theory and analysis of film and the audiovisual at Palermo Academy of Fine Arts in Italy. She is also a research associate at École des Hautes Études and Social Sciences at Paris and founding director of SIS, International Studies for Sicily Residency. She has authored Faire des corps avec les images, la contribution visuelle de la ligne au charisme de Berlusconi in 2016, and Visions and Visuality, a philosophy, politique et culture visuelle in 2018. She co-edited the book with Maxime Boydy. And also she's published numerous essays at the intersection between social sciences, visual, and cultural studies. I'm very grateful for having FRANCESCA here, as we met during our Fulbright time in New York. So I'm happy that we can kind of follow up on what we've experienced. We both know Nick Mercev. Actually, we both spent the time at NYU Steinhardt School of Communication at the same time, collaborating with Nick. So actually this makes it kind of building the bridges going back, but also in the future. And I'm happy that we can still collaborate together. So now I will give you the floor, and I will be happy for learning more about your current projects and also about the topic of infrapolitics and infravisuality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your perfect, wonderful introduction. I'm really pleased to be here. It's really one of the rare occasions, I must say, where I have the possibility to connect on visual studies with people from all over the world. And so it's really a great opportunity for me, actually. As you said, we met in New York at the time we were working there, we were visiting, and so actually a lot of time has passed since. And so meantime, I was working on my PhD thesis, which is my dissertation, which is on visual studies and actually faire des corps, how to do bodies with images, and a visual analysis of Berlusconi's charisma. So it's at the intersection between visual studies and social sciences. I was doing it in École des études en sciences sociales, EHESS, in Paris. So in a center, in a historic center, the Center of Historic Research, where I actually am as a research associate now. And I will start by this because I think I listened to, unfortunately I couldn't attend to the other events, but I listened to the introduction of this wonderful 2 days. And I saw that, of course, we have many things in common and about mainly the politics of the image, or the visual politics. And so that brings, actually, I'm coming there from charisma, so visual charisma, so Weberian notion of charisma. How is it now actualized by contemporary practices of authority and charisma? So I started with the study of contemporary Italian politics, on Berlusconi specifically, which is the leader, so-called leader, who reintroduced visuality in forms of domination, new forms of domination in the 80s in Italy. But actually that was the starting point for a process which would have been very, very important in the years later. So in the last 20 years, let's think about Russia with Putin, or for instance, Trump, of course, and Bolsonaro in Brazil. So I published this dissertation, this book, and then actually with my French group, I am part of a French research group called Répine on practices of influence. And so since 2 years, we conduct a seminar at EHESS, inviting scholars from all over the world on the themes of propaganda, marketing, public relations. So not specifically only focused on images, but on networks, on algorithms, on infrastructure, on politics, practices, techniques, in a very pragmatic way, which means we are very interested into material practices. And so how do people do what they do? So how do the practitioners of influence practice their influence? And what is their auto-reflexivity? So how do they think and how do they speak about what they do? So it's an analysis of the in-depth rationality, internal rationality of influence. And we are also trying to somehow, not to define, but somehow trace the limits of this big, wide field of studies, which is intersectorial, meaning that it crosses a lot of sectors of, for instance, from the industry to laborer work, cognitive work, so many themes. And it's also, of course, interdisciplinary, because we cross all the social sciences. I mean, sociology, history of the present, and also, you know, of course, some ideas on histories of mainly drawn by Foucault's deconstruction and of the logic of history, of modern history, and the periodization. So we are trying also to periodize some influence, or how the name that it had during the 20th century, starting from practices of social engineering at the beginning of the 20th century, especially in France and in the field of industry like Renault, but also in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. So actually the birth of propaganda also in the United States with Edward Bernays, who published this important fundamental book called The Propaganda, in which he explains what is propaganda. And then we're trying to actually see the birth of commercial, of marketing, of public relation, and then of influence more recently, connected also to the studies of governmentality, Foucaultian governmentality, to the studies of practices of conduct and logics of conduct and not the coercion. So in an opposition between direct coercion from the chief, from the leader, and inductive, inducive practices of convincing the others to do something. So also with analysis of Facebook, Instagram, social networks, and that's it. So I'm gonna show you for instance, what we did last year. So this is the seminar of last year. This is the main group of our research group. And we had we invited some scholars like Brooke Erin Duffy, who is she's a scholar. She teaches and she writes a lot about influencers, especially on Instagram, and with gender and labor related issues. So it was very interesting because she brought really data to our analysis and flesh to our analysis. So who are these women? How do they do their work, and how do they think about their work from the standpoint of influence specifically? Then we had some interventions on behavioral economy and public policies. Also questions on the attention, the economy of attention, with Naomi Oreskes and Matthias Girel. And then public relation and democracy in an also historical point of view with Scott Anthony and David Elwood. And then, of course, the algorithm influence with Antonio Casilli, who maybe someone may know. He teaches at EHESS. And also, of course, the history of manipulation, manipulation of consciences and of behaviors. This year we've had an interesting intervention from one of our group members, Hugo Sousa de Courcy and Pier Giorgio Bruno, on the history of public relations. So especially Hugo is is doing a PhD on Edward Bernays, and how this is linked with democracy. Then on the 7th of December, we will have a session on design and governmentality with Fabien Gélédan and Colline Manivelle. And also we invite also people who do things. Okay, so this Colline Manivelle, she's directing this programme entrepreneur d'intérêt général at the Direction interministérielle du numérique, which is a public institutional unit especially devoted to the digital world. So then we will have a session on marketing and history, ethnography of algorithm practices. So with Angèle Christin, so we will see how do practitioners who do algorithms, how do they do that? And then also, of course, a session on image, text, and influence. I think the relationship of image and text is a specific, of course, it's a broad theme that we all develop in our own works, I'm sure. And this is specifically important in the visual field, in what we would call with Nick visuality, so the field of the domination of the visual. And so the relationship between image and text will be also a question for us. Of course, Soviet propaganda and the materiality of the publicitary, the commercial image. So the format, the specific format as an influence tool, so advertising images. So this is what actually I am currently doing, and also, of course, teaching at Teoria e Analisi del Cinema e dell'Audiovisivo theory and analysis of cinema and the audiovisual. And last year with my students, we did a visual atlas of the pandemic, of the COVID-19, and we did a book, actually. And so for each week of the, starting from, let me see, I don't remember, okay, yeah, you see there are the dates. There were some topics dates in which the president of the Council of Ministries issued so-called DPCM, Decreti del Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri, decrees, the decrees of urgency. And so the new rules for, so usually they came about once a week. And so, and it was interesting actually, because every time we had a lesson, every time I saw my students online, of course, it was one, like the day after of one of these DPCM. And so I caught the occasion to say, okay, let's do something with this moment. Let's do something interesting. So let's use the theory, of course, from Benjamin to Mirzoff or Mitchell, the authors that we all know. But let's use them as tools to analyze what is currently going on. And so we did an atlas for each day of the DPCM. And this is what came out, of course, using Walter Benjamin and Bertolt Brecht and Avi Warburg, which I think it's interesting also in relation to the image text issue. Of course, the idea of the journal of Bertolt Brecht during the Second World War. And so there were specific images that were coming out and in the collective imaginary, right? And so I wanted to use this collective, I mean, not to use, but to grasp, to have some trace of this collective imaginary, especially of my students, but me as well. So we did some sort of collective visual analysis and collective atlas during those days. And of course, there are the didascalie we explain. No, I just want to show you some visuals. So the political image, virtual tours like the museums who came online, visual dependency, so like you are dependent on vision all the time, and so Netflix and stuff like that, like drugs, technical reproducibility. And so there was one moment where there were a lot of memes, and so we also tried to record that. And so the relationship with the panopticon, of course, and of the lanterna magica and the phantasmagoria. Okay. The actor as an instrument, the politician as an actor, the power of platforms, from the movie to reality. The movie became reality and the reality became a movie. Here one on the side, on the gaze, actually, the moment where Lynch used to do his Meteo. I don't know if you saw them, but they're for one period, and maybe he's still doing it, but David Lynch started to do every day Meteo report of the day for everyone. And then, of course, this is a table of our atlas, of course, with the eye of the power of Michel Foucault, Rembrandt, and the power of the clinical gaze, reenactment, and also the Warburgian figura, how it reappears in the images of the present. Of course, the power of images. This was, of course, very actual as a movie. Okay. And then I switch to another theme. Okay. Chiara Ferragni. Andrea, you translated Ways of Seeing, right? That's right. I cannot hear you.
Yes, yes, yeah, I've translated them, yeah, to check, Anna. Yeah.
Fantastic, fundamental.
And also picture theory, actually, next to that.
That is fantastic. They're really next. What a coincidence. Okay. So this is just to give an overview of the latest things I did, and that maybe we can talk about, just to jump into your discussion, because you have discussed many things. No? So but then I came to Palermo after New York, and I founded SIS, Studi Internazionali per la Sicilia, a non-profit institute, multidisciplinary, dedicated to the writing in all its forms. It's a writing and research residency. But I found it exactly on March the 8th, which was the day of the first lockdown decree. So it was interesting to open a residency the day that Italy was decreed as closed. So we did some seminars, some collective seminars, because we couldn't meet. And so always on the, let's say, visual aspects of the current situation, also on organizing, but also not only on, like we did a session, for instance, on organizing during the pandemic. And but the thing was also, and there were a lot of people coming because we needed to speak, we needed to talk, we needed to understand what was going on. But the visual aspect was quite also important. We did another one on, of course, on the question of authoritarianism and of the figures, of the new figures of authoritarianism, because with the emergence of leaders like Merkel or Lagarde, okay, so we talked about that, and in particular, one of the intervention was by Aurora Fernandez Polanco, who directs very interesting research group in Madrid, in Spain. So they recently published this book, Visualidades Críticas y Ecologia Culturales. I think you might get in touch also with their work, because we are also an international group, and we talk a lot about cultural ecologies, so the concept of ecology, which is a broad field, of course, and visual ecology specifically. So it's a visual studies, political and academic group at the same time. And so we were on CIS, and yeah, John Scott also on the emergence of authoritarian leaders. John Scott teaches at Princeton, and I met her in New York, actually. And concerning my research, the basic, I mean, of my research on questions intertwining charisma, gender, so charisma, so dominance, politics in the side of authority, of command, and gender. So how is gender interrelated? What does gender does with the charisma? Is it possible a feminine charisma or not? And how do women react, or how do they deal with masculine domination? And also in entertainment industry, so in Italian TV. So these were the Italian entertainment industry, just because it's in Italy, TV is still the major media, or we can say also social media in a way, the social engineering media. It still is. Of course, with the pandemic, things might have changed quite a bit, of course, as in every country, because we all switched in internet and another kind of visuality, which I would be, by the way, interested in talking with you. Question of digital cybersecurity and digital defense and digital policies, especially of the European Union and of the NATO. So I just launched it here, but these are questions that I'm studying specifically, but I did not, and I wanted to talk about, to ask you what are your thoughts about that. So visual infrapolitics was the way I ended my research on this specific theme, meaning that I took, I'm doing the presentation because, where is the presentation? Okay. I was interested in interviewing a girl, a young girl, quite a young girl. Girl following the, let's say, category, academic category of girls. There is a whole girl theory, of course, you know. And so this was a girl. She was about on her 21, 22 years old. And so she was working in TV, and she still is actually, but now more on Instagram, as soubrette, a girl dancing on the stage between masculine presenters. And this idea of the velina became a category, a sociological category during the 2000 and 2010s years, during the recent years actually, meaning the girls completely, let's say, subordinated and dominated by men, and so they were used as counter models of femininity. And I wanted to, especially in Berlusconian era, which, as you may know, and there's a lot of literature about that, has used a lot the sexual charisma and sexualization of the relationship between men and women as a tool to command, as an authority tool. So charisma, what is charisma? It's the power through the emotion, is the power of the affects, basically, and the basic affects are love and terror. And so the Berlusconi's charisma was based on love. So it was a domination of love, basically. And this has really marked a turning point between the First and the Second Republic in Italy. After the fascism, image was deleted from politics. Politicians didn't have to have an image. They were supposed to be without an image. With Berlusconi, politics comes back to image again, comes back to visuality and uses visuality to command. And so the specific tool of Berlusconian era was the use of a feminization of visuality, and specifically a sexualization of this feminization of visuality. Tell me if I am not clear. And so I draw upon the notion of the spectacle of the bar, of course, and Giulia Calcaterra was this young woman I went in Milan to interview about her job as an instrument of this visual domination. And also an important reference for me was Karl Marx in the Grundrisse, where he speaks about the possibility of the dominated to overturn domination, even for an instant, not necessarily like as an organized, within organized movements, so whether they be parties of movements, but the possibility to, at times and in some specific ways, overturn the social hierarchy of power. And so from then I went to, of course, visuality was the field, which, you know, Striscia la Notizia is the satirical news program broadcast on Berlusconi TV channel Canale 5, where these veline are still dancing. Of course, we already talked about neoliberal forms of authorities. So these are some of the references, and the question of the feminization of labor, I tried to see as a feminization of visual labor, because I am still interested in the question of the visual labor. So what is doing images, what is being an image, how do images are produced? So what I think is interesting is the material dimension of the visual. So it doesn't come from above, it doesn't come from the outside, it's something that we produce, that we do in our everyday life. And so this also drawing on the so-called post-Fordist theory of political economy, which is this Italian, mainly Italian set of discourses claiming that we are in the era of cognitive capitalism and of these specific neoliberal forms of production centering on the human being. So centering on affective labor, relational labor, love labor, the labor of love. And of course, they draw upon some feminism and the specific Marxist feminist approaches to feminism, specifically on Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch and all the houses, wages for housewives movement, which developed in the United States in the second wave of feminism. And so the link between the two, so Marxist post-Fordism and Marxist feminism led to this particular concept of feminization of labor expressed by Cristina Morini in many of her books and of her interventions, which I used to understand what was the visual feminization of labor. But not only visual feminization of labor, but also feminization of visual labor. So that's why I chose to interview a girl doing that job. And that is also one of the main entries in our Paris seminar that we do this year and that we do since some years actually. So the questions of effective work as a general model of exploitation. So actually the feminine work, the work of the mother, the work of the wife, becoming the model of all the forms of exploitation. And of course there is an etiquette. So the formalization of social aesthetics. We could talk about net etiquette in some way, visual net etiquette. And I took the etiquette as a visual concept, so I transformed it into a visual concept. It's a concept that comes from the moralist literature in Italy with Baldassarre Castiglione, the courtier. It's actually a handbook of good manners. And so how do this translates into contemporary visuality, and especially in women? What are our good visual manners? What do we mean by that? How important it is, and how do you do it? And particularly a good visual manner for performing her own gender and performing her own etiquette from Julia's point of view was to be an articulated doll. So this is how they wanted her to be and how she had to embody as a visual laborer in Italian TV industry. Also, there's the question of the person, and if there is a distinction, what are the interrelations between our conception of our identity or her person, her persona in the Goffman terms, and the performance and the image you engender. So there are many levels of that. There is an image, there is a performance, there is your person, there is your subjectivity. And all this is intertwined sometimes in a contradictory way. So how do you deal with these contradictions, actually? So, of course, the idea of Velina as a phantasmagoria. Here again, there is Marx and Althusser and ideology and visual ideology. And then the main point was the question of to overturn the image of the doll. So through specific tactics, the word is taken from Michel de Certeau concept of tactic, and now we come back to Marx, as I cited at the beginning in the Grundrisse, which are these acts, these micropolitical acts that you do in your everyday life, in your workplace also, everyday life in the street, in your workplace, to somehow hacker, okay, to hijack and to hacker the playing field of power, using the same instruments though. So using the same instruments against the authority. So I took also the concept of infrapolitics formulated by Scott, the American historian, and so not only Scott and de Certeau, but also Ginsburg and all the Italian history of microhistory, Italian and French microhistory of the 60s, and also the idea of the everyday life formulated by French philosophers and also Althusser in the 60s in France. So the idea of the everyday as the plane, the field of the everyday life as a fundamental field to do ethnography of power, and especially ethnography of resistance, of infrapolitics, of tactics of resistance. So not only strategy, but really tactics. So micropolitics, the field, the viewpoint is very particular and very tiny, just on the level of the everyday. So the whatsoever, the whatever, not the big, the macro categories under which we can categorize some acts, whether they be acts of concealing oneself, acts of affective mannerisms, acts of critique, of open critique, or on the contrary, acts of concealed critique, which nevertheless produce some effects. And so in the long run, they produce effects of somehow of resistance, of hijacking the power in place. So there is also a question of temporality. What is the temporality of critique? What is the temporality of resistance? Sometimes it's a very long temporality. There are not only revolutions like that happen at once, but they can last really long. And sometimes we see the things once they have already occurred visually and for everyone, but the things happen in the meantime in a so-called concealed present, in an infravisible, that is also infravisible presence, so that you cannot really see. It's quite gray, it's this gray zone. So this gray zone, it's something that I think is interesting. So what is between visuality and the everyday, okay? So not hidden, but somehow in a sort of a strategy, somehow of hiding, of the invisibility. Andrea, you mentioned Maxime Boisdy, with whom I curated this book, which I have here, called Vision and Visuality, actually paraphrasing the title of a very famous collection of essays edited by Martinez. And so we translated some texts from Marianne Dohan, Merzoff, Buckmores, Mitchell, and so on and so on. But I'm talking about Boisdy because he especially has studied a lot and is studying the question of the invisibility, and especially in activism. So taking as an example and a specific case study is the Black Bloc in Italy, in Genova, 2001. And so also what is in the gray zones. Okay, so you're not invisible, but your activism acts in the intertwinings and in some gaps of visuality. And then you can enter and overturn and do some interesting things, but maybe not completely openly, but sometimes in a very subtle, actually, way. So talking about tactics and not strategies. Of course, there is the question of counter-visuality, but in my viewpoint, counter-visuality is not opposed to visuality, but it is within. It comes also from within. This is an ambiguous way, actually, because there are these gray zones between counter-visuality and visuality. I think they're really interesting because it's where the things get meshed. And of course, the misogynist visuality that Nick developed in a very interesting article published on his blog, which I really suggest you to read because I think it's an interesting question, the misogynist aesthetics. So here it is. And of course, Stuart Hall and Gramsci, concepts of hegemony. So this is the reference for the everyday life resistance I talked about with James Scott. And also the feminist theory, but now I pass upon this. Yes. Okay, maybe Claude Lévi-Strauss bricolage, of course, is another way of talking about tactics, because the bricolage that you find in the Savage Mind are really the things that you do that really do not correspond to the norm. They do not correspond to what you're being taught to do and to what you're being ordered to do. So you do something in a way that actually is not correct and that will actually hijack all the machine, all the system. One bricolage plus one, plus one, plus one. The idea is the multiplicity also and the scatteredness in the space. So, and also the temporary dimension, which of course is a problem. The practice of everyday life. Okay. Yeah, that is what I wanted to. There are other slides, but I will interrupt my presentation. So this is just to, like, some things that I wanted to talk about and to put to the plate, to the discussion. Because I think I want to grab this opportunity to confront on these topics. And especially the question of influence and the algorithms and how do this visually translates. And also in the light of these, for example, now the European Commission is doing a law on digital markets and on control of the digital field, of our own digital field. So it is, from one side, it is applying the GDPR regulation, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was done in 2006, and so to protect the personal and sensible data. From the other side, actually it is exerting more control on this, because of course this means having much more control on data, defining it and doing a very precise legislation over it. So there is this question, and it's linked with the security in the defense, European security and defense. You know that the European Union is trying to do a collective defense. For the moment, since some years, it is trying to address the question of the military. So, no, and for the moment, the NATO is leading in the field with the cybersecurity and defense. And so I think it is an important topic. It translates in our everyday lives with all sorts of hacking and all sorts of hijacking and all sorts of viruses, or however you might, I mean, whatever. So, but also on, I would say also militant and activist practices. So I don't know. This is a big theme, and I don't know what you think about. And so if you please intervene now. So.
So first of all, thank you, Francesca, that you've kind of presented us all the layers of your work, which I find just fascinating. And I'm definitely happy that I've learned more about the interdisciplinary group RAPIN. Definitely, there are interesting names that we should definitely learn more about and to follow your work. At this moment, I kind of feel that, at least for me, it got kind of split between like two interesting parts to talk about, and we can kind of find some bridges or to translate them from each other. The one part would be this research on these practices of influencing, which I find very interesting, and definitely like the visuality plays an important role in it. And then on the other hand, we've got through this feminization of visual labor and visual labor as a term itself. So these are kind of two big topics, and of course there are some relationships, but at this moment, at least this is what I've kind of got, that we can follow and pursue some discussion around these topics. So for me, what was interesting, what would be my first question, or we can develop it collectively together, was the notion of visual ecologies. This is something that I kind of was really interested in. I would like to ask you if you can describe a little bit more how you understand it. And also, like these visual ecologies, on one side, you were talking about very hegemonic and dominant practices, like are these practices of influencing, which can get even more complicated and hegemonic in a moment when they are operated through AI, through the algorithms.
Exactly.
So at that moment, actually, the hegemony meets with the technology, and it's like automated, hegemonical visualization of our everyday life.
Exactly, that's the point.
And this is like one moment, and this is one part of these visual ecologies. And in a way, on the completely like the other side of the spectrum of visual ecologies, we have these hacking, these techniques of subversive techniques, so what we are using in a way to get out of this hegemonic power. However, we are using these strategies or tools which were produced and developed within these hegemonic practices. So this is like, if you might develop more like on this idea of, and this complex of visual ecologies, which is dominated by these machine, in a way, AI operated, algorithm operated, hegemonic influencing practices, and on the other side there are these subversive hacking, hijacking moments when we are trying to get out of this hegemonic power and kind of to get into the gray zones and to operate through them. So this would be kind of like it's more like if we can a little bit to develop this, as I can see that these two things connect your presentation in a way, at least from how I understood it.
Well, it's very interesting, but I would leave the floor to someone who wants to.
So if anyone want to follow on this, and we can develop this together.
I have something a bit different that came to my mind, but I don't want to interrupt this stream if there was something continuing or someone continuing on this topic. But if not, then it came to my mind just on the beginning when you were speaking about the propaganda a lot, and then it came to my mind that actually it's not clear to me how could I explain anyone who would be asking the actual difference between propaganda and visual activism, and because this is something very basic, and you usually don't like deal with these really super basic questions. But actually then it came to my mind that I really don't know what to answer on that. So I wanted to bring this idea.
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
Yeah, if you had some, like, if you could formulate somehow, how do you understand the difference between visual activism and propaganda?
Ah, okay. Sorry. Well, of course, propaganda is it's a tool. I mean, historically, it's a tool of domination, of visual domination, no? Visual activism, you can find them through all the history in cinema. For instance, if we talk about Russia, of course, in the beginning of the 20th century, because actually the question of propaganda is very historical, actually. So when we talk about propaganda, propaganda somehow, not, I wouldn't say ends, but somehow as a limited story. It's about until the 50s of the 20th century. Then you start to talk about influence more. So when I speak about visual activism in relationship to propaganda, I think it is important to take into consideration all the visual practices of resisting against propaganda in the first 50 years of the 20th century. And in particular, you see them in Russia, in Eisenstein's movie, in the constructivism. You see them in those artists. Also in graphic design artists, graphic design women artists of Russia in the first 30 years of the 20th century. You have a fantastic, incredible production of that. Or you see Bertolt Brecht, before I mentioned it, but of course when he does the Arbeitsjournal, no, he uses visuals, he uses pieces of journals, magazines to do that. Or if you have Krakauer, the Adorno, Benjamin, this is of course visual, they're doing, or they're trying also to explain, to formulate this visual activism somehow. And they're doing it with theory, but they are also trying to understand how this can be possible, especially Benjamin. Also Warburg, Abi Warburg, in the field of art history, what he did is to show how through history you can also read the images in a different way. So you can also be an art historian doing visual activism somehow, in the way you understand the art history, in the way you read it. So for instance, in an anti-modernist way. But these are just some examples, you know, that come to my mind. But it's a wide field, a very, very big field. All the revolutionary art of Russia, you know, like it's just this is the counter propaganda. And also you have counter propaganda also in the United States in those same years, because actually propaganda was invented in the United States and was invented with Bernays. And Bernays was not a politician, no, he was a social engineer. He was the nephew of Freud, of Sigmund Freud, okay? He was also, not only he was the nephew, but he was also married with the Freud's daughter, or I mean, he had a double relationship with Freud, and he used some Freud's intuitions for propaganda, and for him propaganda was public relations, basically, and public relations in the American industry, in the American industrialization moment. So how do leaders in the industry, they command, how to convince the public easily, and so how to convince visually also. The first commercials of cigarettes were done by his wife, who was a feminist, and she did this propaganda, so this commercial for smoking, for a very big giant industry of the cigarette, saying that, showing a woman smoking and saying it's feminist, so women should smoke. And so that's how it started, actually. And then the Nazi regime, and then Mussolini, okay, then you have all these big forms of propaganda. But it's all started there. And we don't talk about because it's not well known at all, especially the women intervention, the feminist so-called interventions within the creation, the production of this idea of propaganda. Of course, a specific kind of feminism, but nonetheless, still feminism somehow. So what we could today call post-feminism, okay, neoliberal feminist. So that was a liberal feminism leading to the use of the image to convince, so to do propaganda, but first in the industry field and then in politics. Politics came later.
Yeah, so on the beginning, you said that the main difference was that the propaganda is done by the people in power, and the activism is like the counter visuality against it. And what happens if this like changes, if we like find ourselves in a position, for example, that the people in power in Europe are all like on the like ecological side and want to spread the ecological knowledge and so on? Would that be propaganda as well, or is it like for you purely historical term?
Yeah, that is a pure historical term. Today we can talk about influence. It's different. It's different. I don't think propaganda is possible today. I think it's very historical. The same time as the same as fascism is a historical concept, and we should use the word of authority and the broader concept of authority, of command. But I think we must be historically precise, because otherwise we do not grasp the specificity of what is happening. So once you say the ecologists are in power, what happens? So I don't know. Of course, I don't know, but I am sure we are in the moment of influence and of soft power. So it's a problem. It's a question I pose myself too. I mean, we do pose ourselves this same question as you are saying. So there was one moment where some years ago, where we spoke about the leaderless movements. And we asked ourselves, is it possible a leaderless movement? So a movement without leaders? And some colleagues of mine, members of my group, they were researchers in Brazil. That was during the big protests. And also during Occupy and everything, we have spoken a lot about, okay, leaderless movement. Is it possible? So I think there are two things. One is to do, if you want to do that, if we do that, but then, so let's see it historically. Is that happening still? Where do we find these movements? And so for me, it resembles to the question you said. So what happens to visual activism once we take the power, let's say, okay? So what happens? It's a question, because if you analyze, if you see what's happening with the previous movements, leaderless, for instance, for me, you see that there are some problems. There have been some problems that leaders have come back again somehow. I don't know. I mean, it's questions. But it's an important question, of course.
And could you please elaborate a little bit more on the moment of this transition from propaganda to the practices of influencing? You know,
Well,
because you've suggested that it's happening in the mid of the 20th century, so obviously there will be new technologies involved, post-war transition, the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. So if you can elaborate on this period, because you also said that with your research group, Rabin, that what you are also interested is this periodization, and you just suggested and kind of introduced this kind of the first period you just talked about. So then the second comes, the practices of influence emerge. And obviously now we are in the third or whatever stage when we are experiencing the penetration of algorithms and AIs into these practices of influencing. So obviously there are different stages, so that might be helpful for our comprehending now to little
yeah.
bit to get to this transition when the propaganda, according to you, seems to be obsolete concept, cannot work at all, and we are moving to another stage of practices of influencing. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, it's currently we are studying it. So I am myself, I'm trying to understand. So, and this, as always, this comes with a historical analysis, as always, because the idea is, for instance, now to see where the word influence comes for the first time, where, when, who, okay? And it's not easy because the word influence takes different acceptions, different significations in different moments. So it's not easy to really say sharply, you know, because it's always a process, of course. And so, of course, it comes with new technologies, of course. Okay. So, of course, we can also say that it comes with the becoming visual of the world somehow. No, from the second part of the 20th century, we have the becoming visual of everything. So this is the visual era, the contemporary visual era. So there is, of course, this comes with the diffusion of television, democratization of images, of new technologies, and also new jobs related to that, because you have the boom in the post-war period of all the third sector sectors, exactly, like yeah, public relation, marketing, design, no, but you know, very broadly, it's very popularized, and all the people working in the visual industry. I mean, there's the boost of the visual industry, that's a fact, that's historical. So this also comes with the becoming influence of command, fundamentally, because you have, I can say, you have first period. I mean, it's not a first period, but you know, I fully agree with Foucault when he says no power without image. So as long as you have power, you've had images, okay? And you can see that in Louis Marin, for instance, a semiotic approach to the authority, the king, the visual, okay. But then you have the industrialization in the mid 19th century, the birth of cinema, of photography. These are specific instruments of the contemporary transformation of command. You have the birth of social psychology, of sociology, of social sciences. So Gustave Le Bon, no, theory of the crowd. It's a visual theory. The theory of the crowd is a visual theory. He uses cinema to show how leaders can use cinema to command. And so if you want, this is broader than propaganda, because then you will have with Bernays propaganda, okay. But the concept of Le Bon, of Gustave Le Bon, and of Gabriel Tarde also in the field of sociology, but in the other field, because Le Bon is a reactionary. Tarde is a proud Democrat, and he is there to show how the crowd is intelligent, and he's visually intelligent. So we understand the images the power shows to us. We're not passive observers, and this is very important, I think, also. So that can be the phase of the industrialization of visuality as such, okay? And then you have this progressive, so I believe we have to see specifically to the transformation of the labor form, the practices of labor. So we pass from the industry to the third sector, and so to more elastic, relational jobs, way of forms of labor and everything. And this is also recalled by Foucault. In his history of governmentality, because Foucault is the first who traces the history of the passage of the transition between a coercive kind of command and the influence. So something that is coming from us and circulating in the social relationship and in the social world. So scattered forms of power. So passing from the analysis of the domination to the analysis of the power relations, which are scattered to us, and forms of domination that comes through us, and so that we, and so Foucault talks about this positive power, so able of doing things and able of doing life, but also of the positive response from the subjects, meaning that the subject, they agree, okay, with their own submission, and they do that. But at the same time, they can also deconstruct it, and so do different things. But the fundamental passage is that, I think. And so this is a process that lasts for the whole 20th century. Then, yes, so influence, within influence there is propaganda, but there is much more. And as you say, of course, the AI technology is just incredible from that point of view, because you have these methods of control that are producive of subjectivity, that producive of docile bodies, producive of consent. Fundamentally, the question is in the notion of consent, no? So you consent to the power, to your own domination. This is the maître-esclave Hegelian dialectics, okay, of the master-slave, no? But the slave becomes his own master. And so you have this notion of control and the auto-reproduction of control, and so not from the outside, but from within. So I think the more you have an internalization of the practices of control, so the more it is like smartphone or like smart everything, smart working, digital and everything, the more you have this internalization and the production of new practices of power and also of counter power. So I don't know how, so where is this gray zone? So between, for instance, artificial intelligence and visual activism. So how can you escape this grid? How can you escape this artificial intelligence? Because in the word artificial intelligence, there is the intelligence, and the intelligence is cybersecurity, cyber defense. It is cyber power. This is intelligence. So if you incorporate it, then how can you? So that's why I'm also looking at the laws that have been made, no? Because they're interesting, the laws, they make you understand how power is thinking to extend under the narrative of the protection of the security, okay? Under this narrating, actually, it is extending its power. And once you do something like hacking, the problem is that once you do it, you are tracked, you're traced. So, okay, so once you do a specific, like a ransomware or whatever, it's the moment where the institution will look that you exist and will grab you and will grab your methods to reinforce itself, to use your hacking stuff to be stronger. So the problem is that, so should you be visible or not? When you are invisible, it's when you're powerful. Following the things that I'm studying. When you are invisible, they want you to be visible. They want you to act visually, so that they can trace you and they can integrate them in their system, integrate you in their system. But they say we have to wait that they show themselves. Otherwise, we have no means, we have no tools. That's what they say. And I think this is an interesting topic.
There are two questions. So first one was Agnieszka, and then I will ask Teresa to join. So Agnieszka, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your really interesting presentation, and it was so rich and so thought-provoking. I think for me, at least, I will need a time also to digest everything and then maybe reflect really profoundly. But as a person with the juridical background, I'm a curator, but also I completed, graduated from the law school. I found that very interesting, the way you observed that double nature of laws, paving us some ways to act. And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I see here something like the concept of pharmacon, what is a medicine, but at the same time is a poison. So so that would be the first reflection. And the second one, I really found it exciting, that the way you talked about not being visual and the gray zones, as we discussed mostly the question like how to become the visibility, and actually we are completely so attached to that concept to come forward, to make it present, and maybe it is really a time to rethink that. And yeah, actually I have lost now my question. Yeah, so maybe I will finish for now and pass the voice to Teresa, and when I reconfigure my my question, I will come later. Okay, but thank you for your presentations. Really amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka. I think that we still can like reflect on the comments, and I will ask Teresa to join. Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, it came to my mind just like some maybe thoughts related that when you were talking about propaganda in the past, I think that it's kind of developed into it's kind of the tool, as you said, and I understand it as well. And I think that the AI is also like the tool of nowadays, that you can also somehow like manage the power you have and put it like through more invisible ways to the people. And I think that the invisibility here with AI is like some of the most dangerous thing for us. And maybe when you are also talking about invisibility in activism, maybe we can also like change our way of thinking when we are trying to be activism, in terms that we are maybe try to be too much visible in these days, even if the like the power people trying to don't see us. So maybe the way is also to be more visible, to imitate maybe the AI, like the people, and like silently pull over our thoughts. Maybe. I don't know. It's just like I think it's kind of moment.
Super question. I would kindly ask, just I have 1 second. I have to come back in 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Go if it's necessary. So this is also the part of the live lectures and workshops that we see each other's bedrooms and we need just to jump out of the screen and to get rushing back. So we will wait a moment for Francesca and then we will continue.
Here I am. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. No
Okay.
worries.
So yeah, it was interesting. Yes, to start with the pharmacon. Yeah, exactly. You're really true. That's so interesting. I have no juridical background, but actually now I am studying it for all these questions. So I am trying to understand how it works, and I'm specifically looking to the EU laws, regulations about cyber and digital. I think it's really, there's a lot there, especially because they are automatically adopted by each state. So they don't need conversion, they don't need adaptation. And so they are really immediately in force. And so, yeah, the pharmacon, yes, at the same time, medicine and poison. Can you develop, please, about that on law, and how do you see that, please?
Yeah, I will try. So, of course, I'm taking that term from Derrida and his understanding of pharmacon. And as a concept, what has that double coins, and it's like a coin of two sides. So adopting to law or legal understanding of some concepts, it's exactly, I think that it's a security as a one, let's say, value, what supposed to have that positive connotated notion. The same means surveillance, what is poisoning, and but also poisoning our security in the sense that we make us vulnerable, and we especially within the activism, we put us at risk when we offer ourselves like in that system, that secured system. So I think there's in the legal system there's a lot of such a sleeper or positions. Yeah, it's for example also with the notion of public and private, what and the right to private might be also like that had that slippery side, or yeah, it's maybe also connected with the question we touched, talking also about the race, and as it is a ruling or the tool of organizing some notion of social relations and politics. So this same follows with the law. So law is also a kind of tool and ruling, and in that sense of paving some understanding and ruling some relations, legal has that double dimension, and not to forget that slippery side of and something maybe, okay, I don't want to universalize, or but it would be something to think about it as a immanent and constant characteristic, and of course for digital regulations is something maybe what we observe now, so present, and but in general it's something what says us about law and laws in that sense. So I just shared that like as brain storming, not maybe to stick with everything what I said now, but okay, for the further discussion.
That's super interesting. Yes, I fully agree. That is the dimension, the slippery dimension between security and surveillance, public and private, and especially in the digital sector, because they are, I mean, the question is to protect the private data. So to protect the private life, to protect the personal data. But to do that, they have to make it them public somehow. So they are controlling them. So it's the total slippery, total overturn all the time between the two things, you know, public and private security and surveillance. I mean, not defense or protection. Yeah, it's protection and surveillance fundamentally. Yeah, and this leads us to the Teresa, what she said about the invisibility and the danger of visibility. Yes, there is the danger of visibility, because if you give your data, if you're visible, then you will be regulated because they need you to be visible to regulate you, and they want to regulate you to protect you, but actually they're going to control you and so put you under surveillance. So what can be a good tactic? To be silent, to be invisible. So is this the way? I don't know, but personally, I'm getting off all the social media. I don't want to be visible anymore. I will be invisible, but I don't know if it's the right way to do. But especially with AI, these are super invisible techniques that we do not even are aware that they are exerting power on us. That's incredible. So should we be invisible as those invisible technologies? Shall we combat on the field of invisibility? But invisibility still is a regime of visibility somehow. So no.
Yeah, when I'm thinking about this question, then I'm actually getting to the fact that maybe our activism should be in making these invisible tactics visible. Because I think that it's a part of what we are experiencing is the lack of the knowledge and awareness of other people. And I think that we are here highly educated people who have a great understanding to theory, as well as they do develop our own activist practice, or the practice through like the critical education or whatever we do, graphic design, etc., and curate the shows. But we when we look at the world, so the way how we see the world is through actually noticing that there are these issues, that there are these power infrastructures that when we are able to highlight for the others, through example, through organizing some workshops or shows, etc. And this is, I think that it's a power of this, our activism is not that how do we operate, but what is the common goal of what we do? And that's making these invisibilities visible. That actually learning people about the existence of the AI and how it actually enhances the extent through which can the hegemonic power operates, for example. So this is, I would take actually kind of the idea of Teresa and I would switch it a little bit, or to move it a little bit to a different perspective and to say that it doesn't depend through that for me the question is not how we operate, but what is the goal of what is a part, what is on the top of this operation, and that's actually making invisible things visible to others, because at that moment they can get to the reflection of the consent, which you said that is like the complete, like the crucial point for you, this consent to the power. But if I don't see the power that is visible, that it operates through me, when we are getting back to the Foucault and to the what you said, so then actually the consent is impossible. But if you are silent, then the consent is like this, that's a priori consent, you know. So in my case, if we will do for example, when we are talking about algorithms and AI, when we do visualize them, which is our work as activists, we make them we visualize them in a way. So at that moment, we can question the consent that we gave through our silence, because they were invisible to us. So this is my thought related to it in a way, to visibility, invisibility, and the consent.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's to share our practices, or to share our goals, to share what we learn. Like, I'm just sharing what I'm learning, and I think I mean, listening to you, what are your also experiences. I think, yeah, it's very important to share our knowledge. This is a crucial point.
And Julia, there is a question coming from Julia, so if I can ask you, thank you.
Of course, thank you very much. I would like to strongly support what you said, Andrea, about also like how being visible and active on those platforms matters. Because I think that being visible is being vulnerable as well here. And of course, it's being tracked. It gives the possibility to the algorithm to track us, but also I'm thinking about the other side of that like algorithm also censors the political and leftist content. And so there is also that struggle of remaining visible when we produce content like that. And one of the strategies I know, and many activists I know use, is using those things that algorithm recognize as attractive, as it is, for example, female body. So I know Instagrammers publishing political content that is being censored and mixing it with just beautiful selfies of themselves, just in order, and like putting I did that, putting like political claims on the photos of like us being conventionally beautiful pictures, just in order to somehow mimic what the algorithm is looking for, what is promoting, but which is also like quite a difficult thing to do sometimes, because I don't know, I have to put makeup I don't do usually, or I don't know, undress and stuff like that. It's not always super comfortable, but it allows us to somehow, and it's of course it's not mandatory, it's a choice to do. And it's like somehow a pact with the system, but it's another way to somehow struggle with an algorithm, like in trying to remain visible. It has its consequences, but that's what I wanted to add here.
That's actually great, Julia. This is a great example, and it tells actually also it hacks the system of algorithms, which actually we perceive as a purely numeric infrastructure, that actually it puts there some performative turn. Actually, it hacks it through our bodies. So actually, then it's really again about how AI, which seems to be completely depersonalized, obviously is in a way subject that can be attracted to our bodies if we perform it. And that's what I find very interesting, because then it gives us a little bit different perspective, and it turns an digital infrastructure into a way a desirable subject, because you've decided to do a performative gesture with your body, which I find interesting. That's great.
Yeah, that's super great. And also, I think that's an incredible tactic. I would say this is an infrapolitics, visual infrapolitics of, because you are really aware of what you're doing. I mean, the Instagrammers that are doing it, it's just super, it's just so interesting. They're just aware of the fact that to make a message come through, they have to also like mixing it with super sexualized so that they don't get trapped, so that they can go through. Wow, that's really, I think it's so intelligent, it's so clever. And I guess it's like super young people, super young women who do that. That's why I think it's so important to ask, not to intellectuals, but to ask to the people who do the things in our everyday. Like my little sister, she's doing also interesting things, but her friends, and I think this is so rich, really rich.
But on the other hand, it's a bit problematic as well, isn't it? Like that you're just strengthening some stereotypes you would like to fight and so on. It's also kind of a problematic strategy for me.
Yeah, but
yeah, I can see your point, because you are feeding the data. You are learning again the system. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I would say that it's like playing with the devil in a way, that like it's kind of a pact with them somehow. It's agreeing to play on the rules, but like we don't have any other world to live in a way. So to some extent, we all live in, like, I don't know, in capitalism, I'd say. So to some extent, we always do that. And also, like, still I see a big difference between if I like have another goal in publishing that photo. And also there's, I mean, I can also publish a nice photo without any goal, and it's also fine. I can be, you know, like it's not being a bad feminist if I know, put makeup sometimes or validate myself by posting stuff on social media. That's also fine. And yeah, it's feeding the data, but it's also like, you know, you can do that if you're having a bad day or something. But yeah, for sure it's not, you know, like easy or pure. And it's sometimes it's difficult. I'm not used to all of, some parts of stuff like this is totally okay for me, but I don't have problems with undressing myself, for example. But there are some other aspects of that like I'm not always comfortable. And I feel like now I'm doing really something, or like I know from my friends who deal with similar strategies, that like now I'm doing something partially, not totally against myself, but really putting myself in like outside of my comfort zone. So because I feel like I'm somehow confirming the stereotype. But yeah, I'm not saying that it's easy or obvious what's better, but like it's one of the strategies.
And there was the question coming from Agnieszka.
Yeah, it's more maybe a comment drawing upon those strategies, like smuggling some content, some subvert content within a system. So yeah, as Julia mentioned, that Instagram methodology of smuggling on the beautiful bodies, some not system conform content. I'm thinking about now, Julia will know very well, and then later I can post in the chat the information on the project. It's about Jana Szostak, and she's a Polish-Belarusian artist, and she took part in the several of the beauty contents in Poland. Beauty contents presenting during the speech and preparatory work when that candidates introduce themselves. She introduced the concept of migrant as a new person, newcomer. So she wanted just to rearrange linguistic description, and she questioned the migration politics. But for doing that, she took part in that beauty contest. Yes, so maybe not to develop because the project of Jana was very much multi-layered, but in the sense of the hacking and the notion, yeah, of that subvert. Okay, I'm sorry, it's afternoon, and I'm going in the circle now with my comment here, my input. Okay, so that was what I just wanted to add maybe to the discussion on smuggling.
Very interesting. What's the name of this artist?
Jana Szostak. I will be happy, more than happy, send that information on the project and the artists. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Agnieszka, and Julia already shared the.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Follow up
Can I reply to what Aga said?
Sorry.
I think that you can continue, Julia. You can.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I was actually like thinking also about Jana when I was talking earlier, and yeah, of course, her practice is one of the examples. And actually, we even, can you hear me? Because it feels like it.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm here. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not. It's not always great, the connection here. So actually, we recently did a charity calendar together with Jana. And there we also like, it was like, it's the money we're raising with it is will be sent to the families of political prisoners from Belarus. And but on the photos we undressed and we wanted to play with that convention of like those naked photos of women with something, like women with cars, women with like guns and stuff like this. So we decided to go for women and cats, because we love cats, and like cats and tits are two best things on the internet. So we just asked like several amazing women from very different backgrounds, like artists, but also activists, actors, different people, to pose naked or like half naked, because like it was just topless with cats. Of course,
I will do one.
Sorry?
I have 5 cats, so I will do it and I will send it to you.
Great, thank you. I can send you the link to the calendar.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we negotiated with every model how they want to pose, if they want, how much they want to show, because some of them had like huge cuts, like covering them totally, but like some of us posed like in a more chilled way, with like not without any censorship. And here also the idea was to, at the same time, like somehow hug the patriarchy, the male gaze, but also like the commercialized body, like the commercialization of the female body. And also we invited many celebrities, so also like their bodies, which are like they have a bit different position, I'd say. So yeah, that's also, and it's also Jana Szostak. We will we can send you like links to Jana first of all, and like to that project as well. But about project of Jana, for me it's a bit, I mean, I knew her, we studied together, so I knew her like when she was younger also. And for me it's very weird to see like how now she's like, I mean, I support her obviously, but like I saw how she like had to work for like to be that Miss, like to, you know, just literally the workout and diet. It's terrifying. I mean, I wouldn't like to do that in a way. I mean, when I think about it, sometimes when I watch her works connected to that topic, I'm not very comfortable with my body with that. Like I feel it very like, it's a very weird feeling that like I see the work she went through to be there, not only in that artistic way of making the career, but also in that like bodily experience of that regime.
It's super interesting. One of the things my Velina, the girl I interviewed, I asked her about was a lot, how do you build your body? And was it at stake? And she was very aware, you know, she was like a performer performing a body, and so having to deal with like each day you have to do this and that, and you have to eat this and that, and you cannot dye your hair, and so the question of the work of your own body, I think it's so interesting. And also, yeah, I'm watching her images right now to see something. Yeah, you said so many things. Thank you.
Yeah, Agnieszka would like to comment on that.
Yes, just shortly. Yeah, because I know also your calendar. I didn't wanted to talk about that unless you would like, Julia, to share it. And I really find it a really great work, great job. But going back also to Jana, I think, and also the points you, Francesca, made during your presentation, images and networks, but also like I meant the question how the social engineering. I think with Jana idea to be a part of the beauty content, it's amazing how she approached people who just like according to them they were watching a beauty content. Yes, they didn't distill that now, okay, this is the activism, or this is, so they took it as granted as a part of the system. Yes, a part of a beauty content, what kind of for many was not maybe quite cognizable. Okay, we deal with the artist who decided to do such a project. However, Jana never like silenced that. Yes, she was like a coming up. Okay, I'm an artist. I'm taking a part in that content, but in that contest. But when we talked about visibility and not visibility, so we have here like two images on one on the other, yes, visible and not visible, and now it depends on the angle you take, yes, and yeah, I find it amazing that play with the real life system involving and engaging some content within, like being at the once visible and invisible. So that would be my very like short reflection about the project and the question of visibility, invisibility, and some tactic.
Yeah, I'm watching now the Instagram that Julia sent with the project with the cat. Yeah, so interesting. Yes, the Liana Shostak is invisible, at the same time she's visible. So it's quite, it can be tricky actually. But I think everything happens in this great, I mean, in this really infravisible and almost invisible line between, I mean, this lets you, and actually, if you look to the feminist film studies in the 60s and 70s, and all the like Marianne Doane and Laura Mulvey's work, theory on the gaze and everything, it was clear for them. It was clear for them that like gender performance, and also if you see the Judith Butler later in the 80s, it was clear for them that gender is a performance. So let's play with it, because it was clear that you cannot be outside somehow. So you can only subvert it just in spots. And I think this is really important actually. And I think it's just the idea of these artists and these girls, young girls, that also Julia is pinning towards. This idea that there's no outside. I mean, we have to do with what we have, with the language. We have to do with it. So we have to play with it. We have to accept. And also there is some kind of joy in it. There's some kind of pleasure. That's what Malvi said, visual pleasure. There is some kind of pleasure also, no, in like playing these roles sometimes. Because the thing is that there is this constant displacement and changing of position, but using our image. And actually, just for the short story, just for the when I finished the dissertation and I published the book and everything, and I published the articles and everything on this visual infrapolitics of the Velina, who told me everything about how did she build her body, sexualize and everything. Then here I came here in Italy, and I had a period of time in which like I performed some sort of Velina in my everyday life. It's like as if I had incorporated all that and it came out. And so I dyed my hair blonde and I was super, like I played sexy behaviors that I had never done, but it as though it came out of me after this research, and I embodied somehow this, but in another way. I mean, it's almost in invisible way, but on the threshold between visibility and invisibility, when you overshow, and it's when Judith Butler talks about performance, and you have the performance shows in the 80s and in the first queer spectacles, queer shows and everything, but you have exactly that hyper sexualization of yourself, that hyper secondary characters of femininity, stress, okay? But it was a way to make it visible, make it an object outside of yourself. And that you have it in Marie Antoinette with the movies of the 40s, the Hollywood movies, like also Marilyn Monroe. You have all that story in the first feminist film studies. They talking about that. Of course, after the anthropological approach to it, what was the name of the feminist anthropologist? She was also her, how do you say, professor had also been Erving Goffman. Okay, she was like an anthropologist, and she was the first one to show the dimension of the performativity of gender. Now she's really Margaret Mead. And so that notion of performativity, I think it's important for, I mean, it shows the intertwinings of the visibility and invisibility, domination and liberation. And so the use of tactics as a way to escape momentarily, because then we go in the question of the organization and which is a whole different kind of of discourse, of practice. It's different. So with the tactics that you, Julia, talked about, and also me with Mavelina, we are talking about politics, but at the same time, it's not organization, it's not strategy, it's not. So this is the problem of the tactics we're talking about. There is a political problem. This is the political problem. Nonetheless, we must be, even though we have to share and see all these super interesting and fundamental practices, at the same time, we have to recognize that it makes a big difference respect to the EU law that can organize, no? Its normativity. This is the big difference. So this is to come back to Andrea when she stressed about the importance of sharing the practices, making visible also our practices and our theories, making them visible, because otherwise, like one of the strategies of the power is to divide, to render invisible. So important to share the practices, and so because this is the precondition for organization. Otherwise, there is no politics.
And there is the last question coming from Bara, as I suppose that there will be like one comment, one reaction, and then we will reach the end of our session. So I will ask Bara.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I know that you said it, but I didn't catch it somehow. Well, you said it a few times that these are not strategies, but tactics. But I've missed, why are you like, why is it important, the difference?
Because when you have tactics, that tactics are individual. They're only individual. They're scattered. They're individual. So it lacks the broad political dimension of the organization and the strategy. Okay. So having a strategy means organizing the multiplicity. Otherwise, you're just in the scattering and in the multiplicity, which is absolutely great and it's fantastic. And I am the first, you know, I find it so important, especially for our everyday lives. I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about our lives and everyday, and not only about ideas. But then when we have to organize, so to do a real politics, which is collective, politics is collective, it's not individual. So that is the really great leap. It's a whole kind of different story. And I think it's just the main political problem, actually. I think.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's also important kind of, again, to see this intersection between the private and the public. Again, they are penetrating, again, like the visible and invisible. So I think that this was really like a great kind of a discussion and talk about like individual tactics and larger organizational strategies, and in a way what is important for our everyday practice and what is important for kind of public activism in a way, and how the public activism intervenes into our everyday life, and how again these two sides, like it's like yeah, it's like a Möbius string still like overlapping and changing the sides, public, private, visible, invisible, tactics, strategies. So obviously we've got kind of into a very specific discussion about infrapolitics and visuality and feminist or feminization of visual labor in a way. This we've practiced what you started with on a theoretical level. We've got into it through a very direct practice, even of one of us. Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing all of that. So I would like to thank to Francesca for actually kicking off more on an abstract level so many ideas that then we were able then to process together through our discussion, and then we got to a kind of interesting collective shape. So I would like to thank you one more time for joining us.
Thank you so much to you all, Andrea, and really thank you so much for all the fundamental insights you gave me, all of you. It was really exciting for me, and I took a lot of notes, and I really hope we will keep in touch in the near future. Just let's share some other documents and elements of our reflections. I really hope so. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. If you would like to exchange anything with any materials and ideas with Francesca, then just always you can contact us, and we will make this exchange happen for sure. And at this moment, I would like to invite all of you to come back at 5 when we will start with our last internal session, which will be the feedback session. We will do kind of the whole wrap up of those 2 days. And then we will just enjoy the final evening lecture, which will be the public one, which will be streamed online live from 7 p.m. via YouTube, and it will be delivered by Huria Butalgia. So at this moment, let's digest this kind of a feminist talk, which I very much enjoyed. And let's get back in 1 hour. And thank you, Francesca. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.